this is Harriet Grayson, your host and producer, Community Culture Showcase. Well, welcome. Springtime is just around the corner, and we give a shout out for warm weather. We're welcoming it. It's nice and sunny today, but still not quite warm enough. And for all those people out there who are Jewish, Happy Purim! The reading of the Megillah starts tonight at sundown. And if you have some kiddies around, the young kids who want to be involved, look it up, see what you got, a local Jewish community center or some kind of synagogue, and take the kids to read the reading of the Megillah, the story of Esther, Queen of Persia. It's a great old story. You get to dress up in all kinds of costumes, and you make loud noise when you hear the Megillah reading with the bad guy. You go ahead and make with the noisemakers. So, and I have an interesting guest now that I told you about the story of Esther, because my guest is someone who's a storyteller. So if she can tell stories like the Queen Esther, which is a few thousand years old, she'll be well remembered. So Bridget Brown, welcome to my show, Master Storyteller.
Thank you so much for having me, Harriet.
So tell us a little bit about who you are, and then we can chit-chat about how we know one another. And then you can tell us, because storytelling is a wonderful, it's been around forever.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, one might say the Bible is nothing more than a big storytelling.
Then a lot of stories, yes.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about who you are and where you came from and how you ended up in this wonderful location.
Yes. Well, thank you for having me on your show. You and I actually know each other from a playwrights retreat. So we know each other through storytelling, don't we?
Yes.
I was one of those, how you'll hear a musician say, oh, I was told that I was playing an instrument. Well, my dad swears that I was, when from the age of about 2 or 3 years old, I would tell him stories when we were driving places in the car. Now, apparently, the story goes that I was sitting in the front seat of the car, so that kind of marks my age, right? Because I was 3 years old sitting in the front seat, which is a no now.
Yes.
But one of my fondest memories of childhood would be Saturday mornings crawling into bed with my parents, and my dad and I would do what were called poems. I used to call them poems. And basically they were nursery rhymes. So we would repeat,
yes.
Jack and Jill and Old King Cole and all of those wonderful things.
Exactly.
But as I grew up, I got very involved in theater, and I was the lead in all of the plays in all 4 years of high school, and I went away to college, and I majored in theater. And I ended up back in New York studying with one of the best acting teachers in the country, who sadly just passed away, but he trained people like Callista Flockhart, Sam Rockwell, who just won an Oscar last year. Mm-hmm. And I used to say to my acting students, and me. And the thread for me through all of that was storytelling. So when I quit acting, I was mostly just writing. I was writing some screenplays, and I wasn't really selling anything, but I was really interested in the process of writing and the process of writing things that had a dramatic action to them. I moved away for a few years. I lived in St. Louis, Missouri, and at the time I worked for a few Fortune 500 companies, and I was doing various types of communication and training. And guess what you do when you're doing corporate communication and training, right? Whether you're doing it, in my case, in the areas of IT or cybersecurity, we are communicating in a way that changes hearts and minds. Mm-hmm. And eventually what happened was I started teaching public speaking at Washington University in St. Louis in the School of Engineering. So I was teaching data scientists, cybersecurity analysts, cybersecurity engineers, and computer engineers how to tell stories when they stood up and talked to people. And the goal of the program was to get them into the upper echelons of their companies. I worked with a lot of Boeing engineers, engineers from Monsanto, and get them up the ranks in their business careers. And what happens in a business career like that is when you become an executive, you're called to go out and go to conferences and talk at the conferences.
Sure.
Well, how do you affect change? How do you get people to listen to you when you're at a conference unless you tell a good story? And so usually at networking events now, I will start my introduction to myself and what I do by saying, have you ever been to a conference where you couldn't remember what the keynote speaker said 2 minutes after the speech was over?
Right.
And everyone's like, yes. And I say, I solved that problem. So what happened was my ability to tell a story, my ability to write a story and craft it became this ability to coach it. And that's what I do. My company is StoryMatters, LLC, and I coach storytelling out of people.
Right.
So I coach it for leaders. I coach it in a training environment, sales teams. I'm also starting to do coaching of, uncovering those internal stories that are told by individuals. So unconscious bias, that's a story that we tell each other.
Oh, okay.
And how do those stories work inside of organizations, be
Right.
it nonprofit organizations, for-profit organizations? It doesn't really matter. So that's kind of the brief history of Bridget, the brief story of Bridget Brown.
Bridget Brown, I got
Yes.
you. So I think of storytelling in the sense of oral history.
Yes.
So I'm familiar, and I've not seen it or experienced it as a business environment, but I can understand that. But I see it as a way of preserving history.
Yes.
So I collect, I try to collect stories. Now I'm a novelist under a different umbrella. Anastasia Goodman is my mysteries. But more importantly, I like to weave oral history stories that I have heard from my family.
Yes.
So my grandmothers both came to this country in 1905. One came from outside of Minsk, which is now part of Belarus, and the other one came from the Carpathian Mountains, which was then ruled by the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. So they had very different experiences. Now my grandmother, who came from Minsk, died before I even met her, but I heard stories.
Right.
And in my latest book, for example, The Terrorist, I got a story that was told to me, and I put it in a fictionalized way as part of the story.
Yeah.
About this, and it's and in my other grandmother, in fact, she lived to be 99, and I lived with her, so I had years of hearing incredibly interesting stories, and I made the important decision to record her. Now, of course, I can't find the tape since I've moved since, but when I take my house apart, I will find the tape. But I taped her as she was telling me really the story of her life, which was, in actuality, it was the story of going from the medieval ages to space travel. So my grandmother was born in the 1880s, so she lived through World War I. She lived through the Great Depression, World War II, some of the other wars that we had, to see a man on the moon in 1969.
Yes.
So she always said that she had moved from the medieval times where she had grown up in these mountains, and they were talking about wolves, and there was no civilization what to speak of. And then she moves to America and sees the changes there, and then lo and behold, there's a man on the moon. So she was, in her own way, a kind of master storyteller, because she was able to come and give me, which I think is the essence of really great storytelling, is she gave details.
Yes.
So that you didn't have to see a picture of that wolf.
That is correct.
You heard that wolf. You saw that wolf.
She drew the picture for you.
Exactly.
Yes. And so now take everything that you just said about your family history. Now let's plunk that down in a business situation. If your leader stands up and tells great stories like that, how far would you follow them?
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
And in today's business climate, where millennials don't stay at jobs, they want the next thing, or they want the thing that is going to really make them happy. Some businesses are struggling to kind of figure out how do we keep people? And one of the ways of doing that is great storytelling. That's why to this day, even 10 years after his death, going on 10 years after his death, Steve Jobs is so revered.
Right.
Because he stood up and he was able to tell a great story. And so that's what I do is I help people to mine those experiences that they had. You know, the great storyteller, writer, producer, director, Nora Ephron.
Oh, yes.
Always used to say, everything is copy. Now, Harriet, do not tell my family this. Everything is copy. I had a friend who said, we were having dinner and she told me something that happened with a away ex-boyfriend of hers, and she looked at me and she goes, that had better not end up in something. And I was like, I can't guarantee that it won't, because it's pretty damn funny.
Yes.
And sad at the same time.
Yeah.
It was one of those situations where it was, you know, something that she was experiencing that was kind of funny in hindsight, but the way in which the other person reflected it back to her was really kind of mean, right? But that's what makes us human. Those foibles are what make us human. And so taking that ability within organizations to tell those stories, and having worked in very large organizations, what I saw was oftentimes the story that the CEO and the people at the top of the corporate ladder are telling doesn't always trickle down into middle management.
Right.
But those people in middle management and below are the people who are actually doing the work.
Right.
They're the engine that runs that corporate machine. If they were all to walk out the door one day, the corporation would literally collapse. And so sometimes what happens, especially when it comes to the story of values, the story of here's who we are as a company, that doesn't get whittled down to the people who are actually doing the work. And it's especially true when it comes to issues of equity, right? If I'm the leader of a corporation and I say, this is the story that I want everybody in our corporation to follow with respect to equity, with how we further the careers of women, how we further the careers of minorities, and yet that story isn't trickled down, that story isn't carried out by the people who are actually doing the hiring and the advancing, the company's got an equity issue. So it goes to pay gap and everything else. And that's what I was talking about before, about the individual stories that we tell ourselves and how those individual stories then propagate within inside organizations, be they profit or not profit.
Interesting. I would think that some of the people who would need storytelling the most are the people who are running for public office.
Yes.
You know, so the 22, I don't know how many there are, Democrats running.
What time is it?
Wait, the new one will be announced. Biden will be announced right now.
Yes, exactly.
So, I mean, it's you to differentiate 22 people beyond the fact that they want the job that Donald Trump now has. They need a story.
Yes.
They need a good story.
Yes.
And they need it in an expressive way. I mean, this guy, this lanky Texan who's bringing in all the money, he's just...
It's so funny that you mentioned that, because I have a newsletter and I'm writing right now a series, because I coach public speaking and I've coached 3 TED Talks, and I'm writing a series now on what do you do with those gestures? What do you do with those like, so, those repetitive things? And the answer to the question really is, we all have some of them, right? You and I are sitting here having a conversation, and as we both talk, we gesture. It's a matter of when the gesture gets in the way of the story.
Right.
Right? So if you can only focus on the gesture, then I, as an audience member, can't reach you. I can't access the story that you're actually telling.
I'm distracting you.
Yes, it's too distracting. So whether it's people walking back and forth or rocking back and forth, I had a voice teacher when I was studying acting who used to say, these things are like our nervous habits, which is true, and they're like cockroaches. If you kill them in one place, they'll show
come
up
back
someplace else,
somewhere
right? So you may be able to get rid of this,
And
but
then you
then
do this.
suddenly you're doing this, you know? And all of it is about, oftentimes when, especially this is true I find in business situations, people don't understand who the hero of the story is that they're telling. So you and I have an understanding of this idea of protagonist and hero, right, from your books and from the plays that I write and everything. But when you're doing public speaking, the hero shifts. It's not the person who's telling the story, which really in a novel is true. If it's in third person and not first person, then the hero's not the person who's telling the story.
Right.
In the case of public speaking, the hero of the story is the audience.
Ah, interesting.
And when you shift that dynamic to understand that the hero of the story is really the audience to whom you are speaking, then the presentation becomes powerful.
Interesting.
Presentation becomes very, very powerful.
I would think it would be a transition, though, from thinking I'm speaking from me as the source to thinking there's somebody, the people out there are actually, I know it's my audience, but I have to think as if I was sitting in their shoes?
Yes, when you're crafting it, you have to think as if you're sitting in their shoes, right? And are they understanding what it is you're saying? So, for instance, in the what we were talking about with the gestures, that's getting in the way of their understanding. So then you're not honoring your hero. If the story that you're telling doesn't, in the case of a speech or a presentation, if it doesn't have a build to it, if it doesn't have something that can be a takeaway moment, a call to action, right? Which is the equivalent of a climax in a novel or a play.
Sure.
A call to action. Now, the person may not agree with you, but that call to action is at its most minimal. Now I'm struggling with words.
Right. Yes.
But it's at least I never thought about it that way. I don't necessarily, I may not necessarily agree with it, but I never thought about it that way. Now, for some people, it's going to be an, light bulb moment, right? Oh my goodness, I just saw something new that I didn't see before.
Right.
Ideally, that's what we want. But let's face it, if we're talking about presentations at conferences or things like that, sometimes they're not going to be big light bulb moments. We're talking, within the data science community, and I work a lot with scientists and technologists. But to your point about politicians, let's hope that call to action is a light bulb moment. Let's hope that that's oh my goodness, I want to get on board this train. Because if that politician can change hearts and minds, which is what stories do, if that politician can change hearts and minds, then that person who just had that light bulb moment is going to volunteer, they're going to get involved. And I really think that we need more of that civic involvement.
Oh, yes.
These days.
Shout outs to the studio because we make it possible for people who are running for public office to have debates with their opponents right here, broadcast around the area. And so people have an opportunity to hear who wants to be their state senator or their state rep. And there's a couple of state senate seats and a couple of state rep seats. And we've done that continuously.
Yes.
And I think that's an important mission for a studio like this.
Yeah, so what you've allowed this safe space for them to come and tell their stories.
The interesting thing is that most of them could really benefit from learning how to do some public speaking. I mean, it's the 22 running for president at the moment. There's a number of them that could definitely use a little.
I can help Beto with his gestures.
With their public speaking. Now, he's one that actually receives a lot of positive attention. And sometimes you think that people say, I don't know him well enough to say it, is that this kind of stuff is maybe distracting, but maybe that his story is not all that convincing. So
Yeah, I haven't listened to him enough to know, but
because one of the criticism is that he's basically saying nothing. But he says it in such an attractive way because people are not used to seeing politicians use their arms in any way.
Right.
That they're giving him lots of money.
Right.
Because the guy who's in the White House, he has mostly ugly gestures and not friendly, positive gestures.
True.
If you look at his face, you don't see good stuff. I mean, he's not smiling at us. He's not showing us any serious stuff, but he doesn't tell us stories.
True, he doesn't.
He's not a storyteller.
He's not a storyteller.
And if Michael Cohen's right and he's a cheater and a liar and amoral, maybe he doesn't want to tell us his story.
But the current president's predecessor was a great storyteller.
Yes.
And that's one of the reasons why the former president could get over the top, because he could, tell the story of what it was like for him when he grew up. He could tell the story of what it was like to be the son of a single mom. He could tell the story of what it was like to not have a father in his life.
Right.
He's a great storyteller. I think the thing, and this goes back to honoring the audience and making the audience a hero, I think that is what, from what I've seen of Beto O'Rourke, that he does really well. Is he has an empathy for the audience. And that's really what that's about when you're storytelling, is having that empathy. And I mentioned this to you before we came on the air. One of the tools that I use in storytelling is improvisation.
Right, yes.
And what improvisation does is I teach a form of improvisation called applied improvisation. So when people hear improvisation, they think comedy clubs, right? They think Whose Line Is It Anyway? They think Second City, Upright Citizens Brigade, things like that.
Yes.
But the form of improvisation that we that we use is called applied improvisation, and we take elements of that improvisation that is done in those places, but we use the elements that go to listening, responding, focus, clarity, storytelling, and empathy.
Empathy, okay.
So that, because empathy becomes the byproduct and better storytelling is a byproduct, because if I'm able to sit here and really truly listen to you, and not just listen, but hear what you're saying, and the better I'm able to focus on you, the more I'm able to also understand the what's happening with you from just a sense of feeling. I can maybe tell if you're sad or if you're, and we do this in our lives, right? So let me give you an example. You call your best friend up one day and you say, "Hi, how you doing?" And she says, "I'm okay." What's the next thing out of your mouth?
What's wrong?
What's wrong?
What's wrong?
Right? So we do it all the time with people in our lives, with our best friends, with our family members, and so forth. And so we have that ability to really sense what's going on. We don't always practice it, however. And one of the things with applied improv is it strips down that ability. So now I have a free class that I teach in this once a month. It's the first Wednesday of the month, right here in Groton.
Okay.
And it's over at the BioCT Innovation Commons. It's a former Pfizer building that's right across the fence from Pfizer on Shenecosset Road. And it's at noon to 1 p.m. It's noon to 12:50. It's a 50-minute class. And we've started having a little following of people who come all the time. This methodology is great for scientists. And in fact, how I got involved in it was, I have a story to tell. I was sitting in my corporate job and I was bored. And on NPR on Science Friday, I heard Alan Alda, the actor, come on and talk about the use of improvisation with scientists. Because what happened was Alan used to host Scientific America on PBS. And he would go all over the world and he would interview scientists of all kinds, medical researchers, astrophysicists, geologists, etc. And he would find that it would take sometimes an hour for him to ask enough questions that he could grasp what they were doing in their science to be able to explain it to the average non-scientific audience that was watching the show. And he thought to himself, I wish we could use various forms of improvisation to help them. And he went to several large universities that have great science programs and said, do you teach your scientists communication? And they said, no. And he said, would you like to? And they said, no. And he was a little dumbfounded by that, but he landed at Stony Brook University. And at the same time this was happening, there was another organization that started in the early aughts called the Applied Improvisation Network. And it's a global network of practitioners who teach this form of applied improvisation. Well, what's really cool is the two groups are coming together this summer. We are doing a conference on Long Island at Stony Brook University with AIN, that I'm a member of, and
AIN
is Applied Improvisation Network, thank you, and the Alda Center.
Okay.
So back to my story. So I'm sitting in my cubicle and I'm listening to this interview and I'm thinking, I'm literally shaking in my seat and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, this is my two lives coming together, right? Because it was my acting background. I had performed improv on New York Comedy Club stages. And it was my instructional design program, my instructional design career, what I had been doing in corporate, and the two things were being married. So in 2014, I studied at the Alda Center for a week in preparation for the class that I then taught to engineers at Washington University.
Wow.
So I'm bringing that now here to the Southeastern region, and this class, like I said, the first Wednesday of the month is free to anyone who wants to come.
Excellent, excellent.
Free is good.
Free is perfect, perfect. So let me ask this, when you do like improv, does it matter how big the group is?
No.
No?
It's better it's always better if it's a few more people, if it's 2 to 4 people, for instance. But when I do one-on-one coaching with someone for a public speech or to help them to get over a phobia of public speaking, I will often just improv with them. We have sometimes 7 or 8 people that show up. I have colleagues who are experts in doing exercises for rooms of a couple hundred.
Okay.
Which is, I'm not sure about that. Like, that's not my thing.
Right.
But what it becomes is a tool that can be applied, like I said, to storytelling and other forms of communication. I have a colleague over in the Westbrook area who is, she's an expert in using improvisation to help kids with autism.
Okay.
We use it for various types of unconscious bias training, for training when it comes to emotional intelligence. There's all different ways to apply these exercises. One of the struggles we have in telling the story of applied improvisation is oftentimes people think, I'm not a comedian, I'm not creative, I can't stand up there and fill in the blank. But the other piece that's really key and that applied improvisation does is it teaches play. And we as adults, we don't play enough.
Right.
We don't play enough.
Right.
And you and I have gone out and we've played, right? We've been on boats and cruises and things together around the area. And that, even though I don't see you very often, there's a bond. There's this little bond that we have with each other from that time that we went there and we played together.
Okay.
Now, if you think of that with the story of a team in an organization, and you not only have the story that team wants to tell about who they are in that organization, and then you put in the elements of play, that team is now bonded. That team has ways of communicating with each other that they didn't have before.
Does it matter if the group is all of the same sex? If it's only men or it's only women? What about, race and ethnicity? I mean, we believe, maybe falsely, that certain cultures are much more inhibited in what they would say publicly. Is that kind of barriers exist for people?
It doesn't, because one of the things that we strive for within the Applied Improvisation Network is equality. Now, in the classes that I teach regarding gender communication bias, regarding diversity bias, we use various tools to uncover those things. We use the various tools to so that we provide a safe space, because you can get to that safe space faster if play is involved.
Okay.
People feel more comfortable with play. I would say that the majority of the time, and this is a little bit of a blanket statement, it's more about how people feel about standing up in front of other people. Mm-hmm. The irony, of course, is that one of the ways that I would get Beto out of this is to have him stand up in front of people and do some improv.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's a great tool for overcoming those fears. And so if you can just take the step to show up and do it, you're in a group of people who welcome you to be there. Mm-hmm. And most of them have they're there because they have some of the same fears that you do. And so it's more, I would say my general blanket statement is that it's more individualized as to how I show up in the world than it is with regard to race or gender.
If you're addressing a group, and you see this, because I've gone to lots of conferences over the years. For many years I was in the insurance business, and if there's one thing they like to do is have lots and lots of conferences.
Yes.
So you see speakers who rest their eyes in the back of the room, and those who focus on a particular person. Mm-hmm. Is there some cues like that are more effective, or more effective in different times? I mean, how do you go if you have this fear of being in public, making a speech? Do you memorize it? Is that important? I mean, what would be some of the clues, the tricks? There's always a trick to the trade.
Yeah. This also goes back to who the hero is. So if the hero is the audience, then that's where your focus is. And the idea is to be able to take in the entire audience. If you're only looking over the audience's head at a spot at the back of the room,
right,
you're not connecting.
Okay.
That's the other power of improv, is it teaches connection. It's interesting. I was listening to an audio tape of a very well-known public speaker, and she said that she's read these critiques of her public speeches where people have broken down how she paused, how she turned to one side, and named what that is. And I just thought to myself, oh my God, I wouldn't have any I wouldn't have any clients if I did that to people. Mm-hmm. Because what people are looking for when they listen to you tell your story is they're looking for the authenticity. Mm. They're not looking for how long you paused and which way you turned and which gesture you made at which time. They want connection. They're hungry for that connection. They're sitting in their seats because they came to hear what you have to say. Interestingly enough, they didn't come to hear you.
Mm. They came for a topic?
They came usually for a topic.
Okay.
Now, that's not necessarily true of certain speakers, right? So if Beto is speaking, or one of our senators here in the state is speaking, people may show up because they're a fan of that person.
Right.
But generally speaking, with most business conference, not-for-profit conferences, you choose the speaker based on the topic that they're talking about. And so the better you communicate that story, the more authentic you are in the communication of that story, that's how you honor that audience. If your focus when you're creating the speech is just on when you gesture and how long you pause for and so forth, then it's not authentic. And the answer to the other question is, do you memorize or not? And the answer is, it depends. And I'm going to give you 2 examples.
Sure.
Generally speaking, when I coach public speakers, I don't actually recommend that they memorize. I recommend that if they have slides, they cue visually off of the slides. So when slide 1 comes up with the picture of the dog, they practice and they say, this is where I say this part. And slide 2 comes up with the picture of the cat. This is where I say this part. Now that takes a lot of preparation. It takes a lot of rehearsal. And that's the mistake that a lot of presenters make, is they don't do that rehearsal. The flip side of it is, I had a student who had not only a very heavy Indian accent, but he had a stutter.
Oh, okay.
And so just the ability to communicate to an native English speaking language audience was a challenge for him. And for him, it was really important that he memorized it word for word and then got up and delivered it word for word. But as he got up and delivered it word for word, it was important that his focus was solely on the audience, because that's how he was able to get over the fear of, they're looking at me, they're judging me, my accent's this, my stutter's that, whatever it was.
Interesting. You brought some photos that we should chit-chat about. So these are stuff that you've taken. Here you go. This one is from, looks like a karate chop.
Yes, it does. It looks like I'm being attacked, or I'm about to attack my audience.
Yes.
No, this is from our monthly improv session, applied improv session.
Okay.
Over at BioCT Innovation Commons. And this is me directing a game that I kind of created. It's called Radio Jack and Jill. So there's 4 people in that. I think there's a 5th person over on the left side. There's 4 or 5 people in that U-shaped form, and each one has a word to the poem, Jack and Jill Went Up the Hill.
Oh, okay.
And the object of the game, it's a focus and listening game, and the object of the game is, when I point to you, you're supposed to say a different word. Now, if I continue to point to you, if I gesture, you're going to just keep going on the poem until I stop and I go to another person. So that's what I was doing there, was I was directing the crowd.
Okay, and what's the purpose of doing this?
This game is about focus and listening. Okay. So the idea of the game is that if somebody had their back turned, the idea would be to hear the entire poem at a steady pace, as if one person was saying it. And so by focusing and listening, focusing on me and listening to what the other person says, it will come out in a way that sounds like one person is saying it. Okay. Ideally. All right. And if it doesn't, oh well. That's another function of improv, is that we embrace screwing up.
Yes.
We embrace screwing up.
Okay.
Right?
Now, the people who come to you, not necessarily these 4, who typically comes to participate?
It depends. We have some people from local organizations. We have individuals. I have a mom who's a former scientist, and she homeschools her daughter. Okay. And her daughter's interested in theater and has some, sometimes has some communication challenges. And so they come almost every month. Okay. And but anybody's welcome to come. We started it. The facilitations manager over at BioCT Innovation Commons, Kim Kelly, and I started it because we have a lot of scientists in that building. The building is a co-working space that has laboratories on one side and open co-working on the other. And we thought it would be a good way for people to kind of communicate. And we've only gotten a couple people from inside the building, but we get people from outside
the building to come in to participate.
And anybody's welcome.
Well, I guess my brother's an engineer, and they do have the wiring is different. I'm telling you, it's just different in the brain, and the way you sort things out. So I think that they figure, this is my shell, this is my universe, and I don't want to be disturbed from my universe.
Well, and what improv does is it connects the left to right brain pathway the more you do it. I always like to say improv is stealth. The more you rehearse, the more you do it,
right,
the more you recognize that you're able to better think extemporaneously. You're able to be more empathetic, like we were talking about before, to the person across from you. The last book that Alan Alda wrote was If I Understood You, Would I Have This Look on My Face? And it's all about his work using improv to work with scientists. So in the case of your brother, who's the engineer, it would help him to be able to tap more into his right brain facilities when he uses his left brain all day. That's one of the reasons we teach this class at noon to 12:50 at lunchtime, because we want to give a lunchtime playtime.
Oh, a break.
Yeah,
yes,
and we want to give people a break. It's recess.
Okay.
It's a way to come and play fun games and recess.
Yeah, that's it. I can see how engineers and scientists would have some difficulty with thinking like that, but everybody should play.
Everybody should play.
So if nothing else, everybody should play.
And one of the fallacies that comes up often with scientists is, I'm not creative. And that's not true.
Oh, it's absolutely not true.
It's not true.
Not true. Not true.
And because they categorize creativity with something like drawing, painting, singing, acting. But we wouldn't have cell phones if somebody didn't get creative, right? We wouldn't have. We wouldn't be
on the moon.
Exactly, if somebody didn't get creative.
Yes, of course.
So that's not true. So if there's any engineers or other scientists out there who are listening who are thinking, I can't do that, I'm not creative, this type of improvisation is not about getting up and being funny. It's about getting up and communicating with the person across from you. And that's that. And I'm an expert at getting people through that, and so I'll take you into it. But to go back to our storytelling conversation, there's one I would love for you to come sometime, Harriet, because there's one exercise that's a favorite of the group that shows up, and it's called Big Brain. And it's a storytelling exercise where you line 3 people up and they hook arms together, and we tell them, you are now the smartest brain in the world. And then we ask them silly questions like, why does peanut butter go so well with jelly? And one sentence or one word at a time, they each answer the question. Peanut butter goes well with, in a storytelling format. And it's just really hilarious, and people love playing it.
Oh, this is the play. We have some more photographs. Let's take a look. What do we got here? What's this all about?
So this is a local community, a mutual friend of ours,
yes,
Emma
Emma.
Ray. And
yes.
I'm in the middle of giving Emma some feedback, or I think we may actually be doing an exercise in this photo. I don't exactly remember. Probably we were doing the one word at a time storytelling. Mm-hmm. So I'm saying something and she's answering me.
So there's always a hidden actor in all of us, right?
There's a hidden
that needs to have expression.
Well,
get it out.
Yes, to the expression. I don't want to go to the hidden actor part, because I don't want people to think that they have to have a certain amount of talent. You don't have to have any experience any talent.
Right? No talent is necessary. No talent is necessary. It's just the idea that there's if you can picture yourself, especially when you're talking about scientists, as being the smartest kid in the room,
yes,
which is oftentimes true for the best scientific minds, the smartest kid in the room, and you want to tell those students, maybe even the teacher, because you could have been smarter than your teacher, about, listen to me, I have things to say.
Well, here's the practical implication of that is, I have a scientific discovery and I need funding. Well, the funders may not be scientists. How do I describe what this is and what the practical application of it is, right?
Yep.
I have a scientific discovery and I need to go and talk to Congress, right? So how we know Congress needs help with their science issues. How do I sit in front of a congressional committee, be it on the state level or the federal level, and explain this discovery and what it's going to do and what its ramifications are, if I can't do it in a way that is distilled and it is in a way where I'm focusing on the audience who is listening?
I would say in that situation, because I have, I do little grants writing and get money for groups,
Yep.
is that you have to be able to describe to those people, they have to be able to say the same thing that you just said in whatever way they use their language. So it could be a couple of words that nobody can nobody can pronounce because they're in Latin, kind of Latin derivatives, but you have to be able to take that and bring it in such a fashion that person who never took chemistry in high school will be able to understand the importance of what you're trying to say.
Exactly. And that goes to being able to recognize who your audience is.
Mm-hmm.
When I was teaching at WashU, I would give a homework exercise to my students where they would have to watch a TED Talk that I was actually at. It was a TEDx talk of a very well-respected brain researcher who's one of a researcher on President Obama's mapping of the brain. I will not mention his name. Unfortunately, when he designed his speech, he used the same speech he would give to other neurologists.
Mm-hmm.
And he was standing in front of a TED audience. Well, what's a TED audience? It's not filled with just a room of neurologists.
Right.
It's lawyers and doctors and instructional designers and coaches.
Just people.
Right? And one of the things that's true in medical research is if I'm a neurologist, my jargon is different from the gastroenterologist that's sitting next to me. Just because we're both in medicine doesn't mean we speak the right language.
Right.
So I'd have my students watch this talk and they'd come back in and I'd say, how was it? And they'd be like, ugh, I couldn't make it through the first 7 minutes. I had one student who said, I watched it 7 times. I said, is that a good thing? She goes, well, no, but it helped me to understand it better. Remember, if you're actually standing up live in front of people,
Right.
you got one shot.
Right, exactly.
I then have them go back and watch a very well-known, much watched TED Talk by Jill Bolte Taylor. Now, the first talk that I mentioned, he is describing how the right and left brain talk to each other. Jill Bolte Taylor is also a neurological researcher who had a stroke. And she's written about her stroke, and she has one of the most famous TED Talks about her stroke, and she tells the story of what she remembers of having the stroke and how her left brain shut down and she was only able to operate out of her right brain because they couldn't talk to each other anymore. And it's a fascinating tale. I highly recommend it. It's a wonderful example of storytelling. And my students would come back and I would say, how was that? Oh my goodness. And the moment that she, and this and that, and I remember this, and they're animated. And that's the power of great storytelling.
Yes.
If there's too much jargon and the hero, the audience member, can't access it, I'm not with you. You lost me.
You lost me.
If it's what I call sticky, which is a term that is used by the Heath brothers, Dan and Chip Heath, their wonderful book Made to Stick. If it's sticky, if you give me something that I can attach to, if you give me something that I can relate to, even if you give me something I disagree with, I'm with you. Right?
I've
stick
listened
with you.
Yeah,
I've listened.
to
I've heard.
Right.
I've
And I
taken
might,
it in.
even if I disagree with you, I'll think about it because I've got the respect of having heard what you had to say, and how does that different than what I actually think?
Yes.
So it's like the firewood that you need to get your own brain starting and burning.
Yes, and to what you were talking about before, if you are delivering it in a manner where you're really communicating, you're not just looking at one spot, but you're really truly communicating with me, even if I disagree with you, I will honor that opinion that you have.
Right. Mm-hmm.
you connected with me. You were authentic with me in the telling of it.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Does anything about body movement or what you wear, do these things have make an impact in terms of the audience reacting well to the speaker? I mean, I'm always looking for the tricks, right? The tricks of the trade. If you can, bring it down to 4 points, and in some ways that's like Trump. Give me the big story, but give me 4 bullets. And in that sense, that any fool could figure out.
Well, I'll give you 4 points, but they don't necessarily go to body. They don't necessarily go to what to wear. I would say dress comfortably. But I would say first, know how to tell a good story, number 1. Know how to communicate with people and not just talk at them, number 2. So that means, number 3, that your focus is always on them. It's not on you. It's never about you. And then the last thing that I would say is check your jargon at the door. That whether you're the other piece of check your jargon at the door is know who your audience is. If you are a social worker and you're standing up at a conference of social workers, there's pieces of jargon that you can use. But if you're a social worker and you're talking about to a broader audience, like a TED type audience or at some sort of conference, and you're talking about this idea that you have for shifting how the foster care system works, you've got to really check your jargon at the door, because they may not understand what it is that you're talking about.
I would think, now I do a lot of public speaking, but I would think the improv stuff really helps, in that if you're looking at the audience and you see they're not with you, and you can see that, as long as the lights aren't too bright and you can't really look out, you can see that if you know enough about improv, you can change gears.
Yes.
That you can get feedback, not much after the speech, but while you're delivering it, and then you can sort of change what you're doing.
Yes, you can. It's not always wise, unless you're really good at speaking extemporaneously, to go off track from what you prepared. But also remember, too, that sometimes when you're giving a speech and people are writing, they're actually not, it's not that they're not paying attention to you. Sometimes they're actually writing down what you say. So be careful about getting too much in your head and thinking, oh, they're not listening to me because they're writing things down. Sometimes they're so into what you're doing, they're writing things down.
Right. You think in today's modern world that people actually write things down?
I do. I see it all the time.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
They're not like making recordings of from their cell phone?
No, and oftentimes I show up now without a notebook, and then I feel weird because I'm typing what the person's saying into my phone, and I almost feel like I have to apologize. I'm sorry, I'm not really texting.
Oh, okay, yes.
I'm taking, which is true, I'm taking
notes
of what
there's
you
a
said,
note part of most of these smartphones.
There's a note part of every smartphone, right?
Yes,
so
exactly.
I have lots of, lectures and conferences and notes from lots of networking events and things, just because I showed up and I forgot to stick an actual piece of paper and pen into my bag. Right. So, so don't assume that you know what the audience is. One way to think about it, and you know this to be true, Harriet, is if you have ever done storytelling of any kind or spoken to a group of kids, what are the kids doing? Right? In their seats?
Yes.
And then you say, what was the elephant's name? And all the hands go up. And so you think they're not paying
really
attention.
But they're, yes.
Right?
Yes.
But
their little brains actually have more power than you think.
Yes. Yeah. And that's true of a lot of adults too. And some adults are visual auditor. They correspond visually and auditorily. So they're going to doodle while you talk. And that's because they're taking in what you're saying.
Well, we're almost ready for some improv. So repeat again for the audience.
Yes.
How they can go ahead and participate in this stuff.
Yes. So we are the first Wednesday of every month at noon at 93 Shenecosset Road in Groton. You can check it out on my website, StoryMattersCompany.com, or
And it's company spelled C-O-M-P-A-N-Y. Spell it all
correct.
out.
Spell it all
.com,
out.
right?
Thank you. Or you can email me at Bridget@StoryMattersCompany.com. You do not need to have experience. Anybody is welcome to come. We especially welcome scientists and those people in technology. And the more you come, the better you'll get at it.
And we really want scientists to leave the jargon behind, because we do have, unfortunately, in this country in particular, we have a bunch of people that never took any science.
Right.
And there's, in the curriculum of schools, there's very little science. So people, when the President of the United States says there is no such thing as climate change, they think, oh, he must be right.
Yeah.
When, of course, it's absolutely wrong. And part of that is our failure as a society is to really properly teach science as well as math to the majority of our student body. And so scientists are this kind of special little group, and they have to learn how to drop the jargon and be able to do more public speaking, particularly in front of school audiences, I think, and also politicians.
Yes.
Because we have to get the money to make the great changes and the political will to make dramatic changes in our society. And you can only do that. You can't depend on scientists. I mean, on politicians. They need to be guided, and so you need a whole bunch of scientists who can be able to teach these lessons to our politicians. Some of them, like for a lot of them, they're old. They don't know
Because the internet is a series of tubes, right?
Yeah, I mean, they just are illiterate themselves. Even if they graduated from good colleges and went to law school or wherever, they just don't know anything about science. So it's dependent upon the scientific community to make it accessible.
Yes.
And then also to push, as scientists, to push the school system to be able to teach science to every kid who shows up.
And to tell the right story to the right audience. That's the ability for scientists to better communicate. I would say that's as important as their learning and teaching of the science, is the ability to communicate it.
Yes, wonderful. Well, Bridget, it's been a pleasure to have you here.
It's been so much fun, Harriet. Thank you
so
much.
We once had an improv group here. And it was actually, and I was part of the group. We filmed it, and it was a lot of fun. So I got to go back and do a little bit of more improv.
Come on over.
Absolutely.
First week in April.
Absolutely.
On Wednesday.
So I want to let you know about a couple of other important events happening in the community. We have, and for some of you, this seems like a big distance ago, but we have this wonderful community group, Southern Rhode Island Volunteers. Now, it is in Rhode Island, but people in Rhode Island will see this show. And we're having our big bowl-a-thon the end of the month, March 31st, noontime. It's a wonderful community group. It provides Meals on Wheels. It provides medical transport for all kinds of seniors and disabled people. And Meals on Wheels is not only making sure someone has a good meal, it's also checking up on people who are homebound to make sure they're all right, to make sure they got enough water and they're taking their pills and they're feeling okay. So it's much more than simply giving out a meal. And we do everything with volunteers. They deliver the meals, but we got to pay for the meals. So I want you to come to the bowling alley. It's Old Mountain Lanes, beautiful bowling alley in Wakefield, Rhode Island. Just think of it as your Sunday excursion. So get yourself down there on March 31st. The other thing I want you to let you know about is my continuing project, Literary Salon, Books and Brews. Shout out there to Colin Bennett, the owner of the Malted Barley, wonderful pub restaurant. Come on, and April, every month is a different theme. Our theme in April is springtime. It's the Easter parade. It's Passover. It's all the things about spring. So I want you to come, and if you are an author, please come and read your stuff about springtime, or if not, find yourself a famous writer, a poet, who knows what, fiction, nonfiction. Come and read. I invite the public. We've had a lot of fun with the public reading some of their favorite stuff and some of the authors reading theirs. So again, come on down, Literary Salon at Books and Brews, Malted Barley, wonderful downtown Westerly, Rhode Island, April 23rd, 7 o'clock. So I want to thank my audience. Come back again. And this is Harriet Grayson, your host and producer for Community Culture Showcase. Bye-bye.